I'm Ashley Victoria Robinson.
And I'm Jason Inman.
And we are here to bring you a review and recap of Sherlock Season 4, Episode 2, The Lying Detective. Now this episode is going to be full of spoilers, so if you haven't seen the full episode, you might want to come back later. The Lying Detective begins with John Watson in therapy, as we saw him at the beginning of the very first episode of the series. He's not coping well. He tells the therapist he's been drinking and that he is hallucinating Mary. Very bad stuff. And Aston Martin suddenly pulls up to the house and creates a lot of controversy. Then we hard cut to Toby Jones playing Culverton Smith, the villain of this episode. He lays out to a friend of his at a board meeting that he has a conundrum. He needs to kill someone. And in order to cover this, he drugs them so they won't remember what he told them. His daughter Faith is present, and she doesn't take her problem very well, so she takes this information to Sherlock Holmes, hoping that he can help her. His hands are shaking, he's sweating, and the world's only consulting detective does not look like he's in good shape. We briefly meet his new roommate, who might just be a drug dealer, but we're not really sure. Sherlock chases Faith as she's about to leave, frustrated with the way he's treated her, and says that he will take the case if she goes out with him for chips. They spend the night walking around London. She presents the note she wrote at the beginning of the episode to him, and Sherlock makes a bunch of deductions based on the information he finds in that note. Then we hard cut in between these scenes to a bunch of Culverton Smith TV adverts, getting the sense of just how powerful a character he is. In the morning, when Sherlock and Faith sit beside the River Thames together, he takes away her gun, throws it into the river, and when he turns around after a drug-induced fit, she's not there anymore. Is she real? Was she ever real? And is Culverton Smith looking to kill someone in particular, or is he willing to kill anyone? All right, there is so much to unpack. There is a ton of stuff that happens in the first act of this episode. I do want to say that this episode is called The Lying Detective. Mm-hmm. It is based on the Arthur Conan Doyle story, The Dying Detective.
Oh, the lying's going to come into play.
Both of them are going to come into play. He's lying and he's dying. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about some Easter eggs from that really, really quick. Sherlock being in a state of ill health is definitely lifted directly from the story. And the villain's name that Toby Jones is playing of Culverton Smith, his wealth and his prominence are directly lifted from the original story.
I want to talk about Toby Jones right out of the gate.
Yeah, let's.
I think there's a nice little Easter egg, especially since Toby Jones was the Dream Lord on Doctor Who, another Stephen Moffat show. But let's talk about the boardroom scene. I was very impressed by that. One, because they were actually filming in a practical building, but two, they only lit the scene from the table. Mm-hmm. And that was, I thought, an interesting lighting choice. But also, if you know anything about cinematography, when you underlight someone, it means they're villainous.
Right out. I mean, they don't cover up the fact that he's villainous for very long.
No. But I just thought, put it in there a little subconscious. I love Toby Jones. I think he's an amazing actor.
I agree.
To be honest with you, I kind of wish that he had played. Who was the villain of last season?
Charles Augustus Magnuson?
Yes, I kind of wish he had been Magnuson instead, and I wish we would have got him for a whole season. I'm kind of a little disappointed that we're only going to get him for one episode because he's strong enough to be a full season villain.
That's usually what happens with Sherlock villains, though. Even if they're seated in other episodes, they only get one or maybe two appearances.
True. One case, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
I thought there was a lot of crazy editing in this. I thought this was one of the weirdest shifts to starting a Sherlock episode I've ever seen.
I agree.
Especially when you get the reveal of who's inside the fast, speedy car, which I didn't quite like.
Well, we'll come to that in a little bit.
We'll get to that. But then John is back in therapy again, and he's imagining Mary. Now, I liked and didn't like that for the same time because I always feel that when you do an imaginary person, you're kind of always competing with the movie A Beautiful Mind. I agree. Which did that magnificently.
You're never going to beat that reveal. Plus, we already know that Mary's dead.
We know that Mary's dead, and so it always becomes weird to me because I've never met a person in real life, and I've known some people, and there may be other examples out there. Sure, come at me in the comments. I've never met a person who has imagined a person, a dead spouse, or anything like that in talking to them. And we see a lot in fiction.
But it feels very fictionalized. Yes. I would say so. Yes. Although I'm sure there are cases like that, but it does feel like a movie
What did you think about him seeing Mary everywhere?
So, not a Mary fan. Mm-hmm. I don't know if the last episode gave that away. I thought this was the perfect way to deal with a character. Okay. I liked it. I thought it was a nice goodbye to her. I'm sure she's going to be around next episode for contract reasons, but I liked seeing her as like a personification of what John is going through because John is a really strong character, like we've talked about in the past, for all the characters around him. So even though you know he's going through stuff, I think putting that on display was really interesting. And I think Amanda Abington really brought like an interesting ethereal quality to just being there. I didn't need her to talk.
Oh.
The conversations, I think it would have been better if John was talking to her alone, and if she was just there as a personification of his grief. But I didn't mind having her around. But I actually really liked Sherlock's scene with Faith in this episode, because Sherlock notoriously treats women horrifically.
He's very nice to her.
Actually, to pull something directly from the original story, there's a whole paragraph that Watson writes in there about how Sherlock mistrusts women, he doesn't like women, he doesn't respect women, but he's like a gentleman. Sherlock. So he treats them very well, and he's kind to them.
And I thought the idea of him walking the path.
Yes, that spells out a message to his brother.
He spells out a message to his brother was very funny. I also thought it was very cleverly revealed. If you notice and you look in all the security footage of Sherlock walking around, they do never show Mary. No, not Mary.
Faith.
Faith. They never show Faith ever once, which is a very helps the reveal that comes later.
I think it's a great editing choice as well, because his crazy roommate, whose name either they didn't say or
it's
I
not
didn't
his
get,
roommate. It's his dealer.
Right, but who's making meth in the kitchen?
Yes.
He doesn't ever interact with her. And Mrs. Hudson, Faith is already out the door by the time Mrs. Hudson is like, "Where are you going? You're obviously ill." I just thought it was a really surprisingly sweet scene.
Yeah, totally.
Then we jump to 3 weeks later. We go back to the car that is stopped outside of John's therapist, and Mrs. Hudson, of all people, gets out and begs that John come back and look after Sherlock. She states that he has a bunch of erratic behaviors, which we'll talk about, that are lifted from the original story, and Mrs. Hudson says to John, "The game's afoot," a very famous Sherlock Holmes quote. John does not want to go with her, but he finally agrees because he's a good person. She drags him out to the car to reveal that Sherlock is hiding in the trunk. All right, so we finally have Sherlock and John back together again for the first time again.
All right, you said that there were some nice Sherlock ties to canon.
Right.
What were you talking about?
So there's a bunch of Easter eggs in here. In the original Dying Detective story, Mrs. Watson does go to John's house because John is married at the time. It's the second year of his marriage.
In an Aston Martin?
In an Aston Martin, yeah. He's living outside of Baker Street in his home. She takes a hansom cab, as a matter of fact, to go find him. And she states that Sherlock is playing music really loud all day and night. He's wandering around and screaming. He's making deductions. He's hanging things on the wall, and he's firing off weapons inside the home.
Which he does do.
And those are all, instead of making them one after another, Sherlock just does them all at once, because this version of Sherlock is just that talented. I really like that, and I like having Mrs. Hudson say the game's afoot, or the game is on, because that is something that we have had the other characters say throughout the TV show. But as we know, it's a very, very famous, Sherlock Holmes line.
I know we've made a couple mentions to Mrs. Hudson's old husband. Have they revealed? I forgot. Have they revealed exactly what her husband did?
Yes.
Okay.
So in the first season, she states that Sherlock helped her when her husband was on trial, and John says something to the effect of "Oh, you got him off." And Sherlock says, "No, I made sure he goes away." And then in further seasons, we learn that he was a drug dealer.
Yeah,
she's the wife of a drug lord.
Some sort of very, very rich drug lord.
Which is probably how Sherlock got into the mix.
Yeah, or how he came across the flat.
Yeah.
But
she winds up hiring him to make sure that her husband goes to jail.
Her being in the driver's seat was a little weird, and I almost thought it was the one. I think it was the one part of this episode that I didn't buy. Although I appreciate the joke of it, it was almost too much, because the only reveal is that Sherlock's in the trunk.
Yeah. So Una Snubs, who plays Mrs. Hudson, I think is wonderful.
She's great.
I love her in this part, but this was too far for me. This was too much James Bond fantasy. I mean, it's an Aston Martin, for God's sake.
The better part of the scene, I thought, was how Sherlock predicted John by 2 weeks.
Yes.
And everybody kept showing up 2 weeks. They were like, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks.
I also like that there's a montage here where we see that Mrs. Hudson is so badass that she intentionally drops a teacup so Sherlock will catch it, put down his gun so she can take the gun and force him into the trunk of the car, or the boot, she's basically going to help him for his own good. I thought the reveal of Sherlock in the trunk was really funny.
Yeah, and then it was kind of cool that
Culverton,
excuse me, calls up John and is like, "Oh, you're coming to lunch."
Oh, wait, we're not at that part.
Oh.
We'll roll right into that right now.
We'll get there.
So Culverton Smith calls John and Sherlock, sends a car, and tells them to meet him at the studio. Sherlock pleads for John's help in this case just one last time, and John says, "Only if you see a doctor, only if you see Molly." And then Molly shows up, because she was called weeks and weeks ago by Sherlock. John gets in the car with imaginary Mary and drives all the way to the studio. Sherlock drives with Molly in the back of an ambulance, and they meet up at the studio with Culverton, where he is doing a serial killer commercial. They all go to the hospital after that to entertain some little kiddies, and he takes them to his very favorite room there in the morgue. Faith arrives just on cue, and she is not the same woman that Sherlock had talked to previously, and he starts to freak out. Intercut here are an interview with John and Lestrade where it is revealed that Sherlock has a scalpel. He tried to attack Culverton, but John took Sherlock down and subdued him. We're getting into the action. We're finally getting our baddies together.
Let's talk about the most unrealistic part of this episode.
That someone would brand their cereal as a serial killer?
Or that very close. The fact that somebody would let somebody as not as good looking as Culverton be the guy he's just like, I'm a serial killer.
But I will say...
And the way he eats it, he's like, oh.
Right, there's also a spit take scene, which is like foul. Which Toby Jones just kills it, pun intended, in this role. Like, he's tremendous.
Fantastic
he's
actor.
terrifying.
Yeah.
I will say devil's advocate, though, if you're already rich and you're ugly, maybe they'll still put you on TV.
Great Britain, I don't know what's going on. True.
I would say in North
America.
America.
Or they'll make you president.
Yeah, one never knows. What do you think about when we finally get the three main players of this episode together?
I liked it. Mm-hmm. I really, really liked the scene where Culverton tricked Sherlock into going to the children's hospital, and I like.
There's no way that they're gonna let him into that kid's ward too. He's sweating. No. He doesn't look good.
And I like the idea that everybody thinks Sherlock writes the blog, which I thought was very funny.
Yeah.
I like the whole idea of the children. The whole scene kind of collapses though when Culverton tries to like one up Sherlock with his clever wordplay.
But he mostly just becomes a total creepo.
Yeah, and it's one of those scenes too where it's like it was so on the nose a little bit too much that they're like even the children in the room got to be like, yo, he's a serial killer, right?
Right, or if not weeping, like openly weeping.
Yeah, he strangles people, right?
Yeah.
I'm pretty certain he strangles people. So, but I like that scene. I like the idea in the morgue, and to be honest with you, I felt John punching the crap out of Sherlock and kicking him was not only a manifestation of Mary's death, but maybe a manifestation of the previous 3 seasons of Sherlock all in one focused incident.
I would agree. Like, he's taking all of his anger on Sherlock out in that very moment. I really like the scene where Culverton is in the morgue. He's talking to John, and he's like, but are you really a doctor? Like, you're not just a doctor of philosophy. Like, are you really a doctor?
Fair point.
He's pushing his buttons because Martin Freeman plays it so well where his subtext is F you. And it really comes across in that scene. And there's a great build, I think, from that point to him beating up Sherlock of his emotion. I just think it's a great John Watson performance.
It was a great there's always great moments, and especially like classic Sherlock Holmes stories too, where like the villain is there and Sherlock thinks he's got him and he says the thing and the villain's like, you did not get me. And that's kind of what this was.
Yes.
And I really, really appreciate that scene because it helps set up the massive twist or the prestige, as it will, coming later.
But especially because you need a villain every once in a while who's going to come along who can't best Sherlock because we need Sherlock to win in the end, but who can give him a run for his money. And then when Faith shows up and it's not the same woman, she's the woman from the first scene, and then the woman we meet in the second scene is a different actor. I didn't even realize that until they told us because between the lighting, the costuming, and the makeup, it's so well done.
I was
blindsided
by that. I was like, whoa, what? And actually at the time, like I was like, oh, so what is the deal here? Like, what is the thing? Of course, we learn what it is. Also, I want to point out another Stephen Moffat Easter egg in here, specifically Stephen Moffat.
Ooh, please.
Stephen Moffat does not like Twitter. He has said that several times.
True.
And there is a Doctor Who joke in the Bells of St. John where
that's a great episode.
The Doctor like talks about how much he hates Twitter. We got a reference in here where Dr. John Watson talked about Sherlock tweeting. He was like, oh, Sherlock's tweeting. Oh, what does the world come to?
Yeah, there is a plot point about Sherlock's tweet to Culverton. There's also a little tiny canon Easter egg here because Culverton has the keys to everywhere in the morgue, everywhere in the hospital, I'm really sorry.
Ooh, what is that in reference to?
So in the original story, he's not a doctor, but he has access to St. Bart's, which is the medical school where John Watson trained, because he is working on researching a very specific Sumatran disease. So I thought that was a cool Easter egg to fold in.
Very cool, Watson.
It turns out that John has put Sherlock in the hospital, and he comes into his room while he's sleeping to say goodbye to him. He receives a phone call from Mycroft calling him in for a meeting that takes him away. Then, out of nowhere, the walls open up. This is another Easter egg, and Culverton walks out to be very, very sinister. Mycroft and John meet up at 221B, where they're taking apart Sherlock's apartment to try and figure out exactly what is going on. Here we get a reference to Sherrinford Holmes, who's maybe another brother. We don't really know. John discovers Mary's video will hidden amongst Sherlock's belongings and gets very upset when it starts to play. Sherlock finally wakes up in the hospital from his drug-induced haze, and he discovers that Culverton has been there watching him all along. He tells Culverton, "I want you to kill me." Culverton is more than happy to oblige, and he confesses. He proves that Sherlock is right all along, and he goes on to smother him. Okay, real quick, I'm going to start off with Easter eggs again, because we have two really interesting ones, I think, that have happened so far.
Okay.
So, we see the door. It's a really nice hospital
That's the
room.
nicest hospital I've ever seen in my life.
Well done, Great Britain. We see the wall open up, and you see Culverton coming out of the wall. This is kind of a two-part Easter egg. One, earlier in the episode, he references H.H. Holmes, who's an American serial killer who built this castle with secret doors and tunnels so that he could kill people.
It was a hotel, right?
It was a hotel in Chicago. So that's a throwback to that. And in the original Dying Detective, Sherlock hides John in a wall behind his bed so that he can hear Culverton Smith's confession.
Oh, nice.
So different characters used in a different way, but the same device. And the reference to the name Sherrinford Holmes. Sherrinford Holmes is a character created in one of the very famous Sherlock pastiches, because Sherrinford was originally going to be Sherlock's name before Arthur Conan Doyle changed it. He is supposed to be an elder brother to Sherlock and Mycroft, who stayed at home on the family estate. So I'm not quite sure what's going to happen with that character, as you'll see us talk about more towards the end of the episode, but it was a nice little nod back to canon.
Nice.
Okay, so we have the final meetup between Culverton and Sherlock. Toby Jones continues to be really, really scary in that. Was there any part of it that surprised you?
No part of it surprised me. The part of it was, this is Toby Jones eating the scenery, and you can have Toby Jones eat the scenery any time of the day, and I'm in. I thought it was great. I thought it was his best scene in the book. I actually felt that Benedict Cumberbatch did a great job of portraying the fear of him actually dying. I thought that was well done. The part of it that I thought was a little weird was that the elaborate scheme, and of course this is Sherlock, so I have to let it go. But
at a certain point,
the elaborate scheme that Mary was like, okay, you're gonna have to do this. You're gonna have to let John punch you in the gut. You're gonna have to fall into drugs. You're gonna have to imagine that a girl was walking around with you. You're gonna have to take her for chips. Chip, it has to be Chip, Sherlock, and then John will save you. You know, like this.
I agree with that. I'll give you two characters who can do that in this universe. It's Sherlock and Mycroft. So having it come from Mary feels very strange to me. I don't mind the beginning of like, please save John, because like we love John. Let's do something nice for John.
And also we finally get the explanation of the little Easter egg where Mary last week said, "Go to hell, Sherlock," after the credits.
Yeah. It's not just like, oh, I hate you. Blah.
Yeah.
And then what did you think about the possibility of another Holmes sibling?
That's interesting to me. That's very intriguing. I'm very excited about that. I like that idea. Like, it's not really in canon, apparently.
It's not.
But you know what? If it's a very famous pastiche, then I'm cool with it, because you know what? We got another season of Sherlock after this one. Let's go some places.
They're all signed for one more season.
Yeah, totally.
The most unrealistic thing I thought about this was during the end of this scene where they're in 221B, Mrs. Hudson just screams at all these officials to leave, and like they don't really have to leave.
And she calls Mycroft a reptile.
I mean, Mycroft is a reptile. Let's be very clear about
totally,
that.
100%.
Sherlock then reveals that he faked his illness all along and has recorded Culverton's confession so that he can keep him out of the public eye. Lestrade plays the recording for Culverton and takes the rest of his confessions, and it turns out to be pretty scary. We end on a scene of John and Sherlock back together in 221B Baker Street, calling back to a lot of their times together before. Mary's still there, which is a little bit strange. John doesn't want to stay with Sherlock. He's going to leave 20 minutes early, but when he hears Irene Adler's text alert, he turns around and comes back to talk to her. As he's talking, he winds up confessing to Mary, who's not really there, that he cheated on her in a text relationship. Sherlock hugs him, which is a huge moment for them, and they kind of make up and agree to be friends again. As they are going out for the night, Sherlock puts the hat on and leaves the house once more. Then we cut to John in therapy, just the same as we saw him in the first scene, and the therapist reveals that she is actually Sherlock's secret sister, and that there's a very specific reason why she wants to talk to John. It ends with a gunshot, and we don't quite know what happened in the interim or where that gunshot went. Well, I thought there was a lot to unpack in the beginning of this episode, but it turns out there's even more to unpack at the end.
Statement right now, there's always a lot to unpack in Sherlock.
Oh, man, but the end, that's such a... Moffat loves to leave you on a cliffhanger, and
Nothing wrong with that.
I think is a particularly
Good
interesting
television leaves you on a cliffhanger. That's the mark of great television. And I think... The interesting thing is, first of all, we'll talk about the elephant in the room at the end here in a second.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the scene with John and the text alert and him confessing to Mary that he sort of cheated through text, and then Sherlock and John hugging and Tumblr exploding.
But it actually winds up that we talked a little bit about how much we thought John cheated on Mary, and we were completely correct.
We were completely correct. Well, he didn't even go as far as we thought. We thought he even had coffee with her. He never had coffee with her.
Yeah, they just texted.
It was a text conversation. Now, I really liked the moment where John looked at Mary and confessed, and I thought that was the moment finally when the Mary stuff really worked well. I also really liked this scene for the fact that this scene really reminded me a lot of season 2 Sherlock.
I would agree.
And
that's their most bro season.
Yes, and I miss that
for
this show. I miss them just constantly being enemies. They don't like each other, fine, but they also do love each other. But I'm tired of them just kind of like Civil War. I'm tired of Captain America and Iron Man fighting. They're friends.
I agree. They don't always like each other, but they love each other. And I don't mean that in a shipper way, but they just love each other.
John Locke.
I'm not a John Locke shipper. If you are, that's aces for you. I'm not.
Yeah. So I really appreciate that scene. It really reminded me about season 2.
Yeah.
Did you dig it as well, or do you want to move on and talk about the big elephant in the room?
Okay, so I liked this return to John and Sherlock's friendship. I love the end. Like John has had his big thing. I think the hug was nice.
Yeah, it's
I
good.
think it was earned. I know Tumblr's going to explode over it.
Oh yeah.
I loved the moment where the music swells and Sherlock puts on the hat as they're going out, and John's like, "You wear the hat?" And he's like, "I'm Sherlock Holmes. I have to wear the hat." It's a little that is a total fan service moment, but the way it was done really just made my heart sing. I have thoughts about the Irene text alert.
All right, let's talk about this.
Okay, so Irene Adler, you will remember her from Scandal in Belgravia. Laura Pulver, amazing. My favorite Irene Adler.
She's hot.
She is.
Oh, yeah.
Man, I would kiss her face. And Sherlock saves her in the end. Everybody else thinks she's dead. John thinks she's dead. The text alert is interesting for John, obviously, because now John is learning.
Now John knows.
Sherlock has a heart. My problem with it is I like the idea that Irene is the one who got away, because canonically she leaves. She's American. She goes back to America and traipses across Florida or whatever it is that she does in the interim. There's a ton of pastiches. Go read them if you're interested. And Sherlock holds on to this picture of her. He pines after her, and I'm okay with that. I don't know if I'm behind the idea that they can just chat every once in a while. And what I really don't like about it is that this now opens a door that we can see her again.
I don't think we'll see her again.
And I think Scandal in Belgravia is the single most perfect Sherlock episode that we've
ever
had. And I don't ever want to see her again.
I don't think we'll see her again.
To ruin the magic. So I didn't dig that.
I'm fine with it because she is sort of a female Sherlock Holmes, and I'm okay that she's still alive out there. I'm okay that they talk because they never reference that they actually meet up. It seems like all it is texting.
I agree.
So I'm fine. We won't see her again. I'm putting money on it right now. She will never come on the show again.
I hope she goes on to bigger and better
But let's
things.
talk about a different she. The Sherlock she.
Oh, can I drop a really quick Easter egg?
Quick.
Okay, so there's a really
We're never going to get to Sherlock she.
There's a really short scene where you see Mycroft and he's talking to this lady who we saw earlier in the episode who you think is a really minor character, and maybe they're sleeping together. She puts down her card on the table. It says Lady Alicia Smallwood. In the Charles Augustus Magnuson episode, he's listing off people that he's killed or influenced, and one of them is Elizabeth Smallwood, who could either be a relative of hers or the same character with the wrong name. I just thought that was really, really cool.
Okay. Let's talk about the Sherlock. Let's talk about Sherlock. Let's talk about how we finally learned that this Miss Me is a Holmes.
Yes,
It has nothing to do with Moriarty. Thank God.
It was, I think, that Sharonford / Euros. Euro, like the sandwich. That she chose to use the image of Moriarty because she knew it would evoke a feeling in Sherlock. It was done for a reaction. I love Andrew Scott. He's not coming back. What did you like the reveal?
I'm asking you.
Oh.
I'm asking you.
I have mixed feelings about the reveal.
Okay, go.
I think it is really cool from a storytelling perspective that Sherlock and Mycroft have another sibling who might be transgendered. Because the implication throughout this episode is that
it's a brother.
And the Holmes brothers duh. And Sharonford is a male name. I know that might surprise you, but it is a male name. And I like the idea that, like, maybe it was a brother and now she's a sister.
Sure.
That's really cool.
Because there was a quick second there that I was like, oh, did Moriarty get a sex change?
Right.
What are we doing here?
And it is also revealed that she's the same woman who John had a text flirtation with.
She's she's kind of the weird manipulation of this entire season.
Right. So, like, I'm okay with it from that perspective, even though Sharon Ford is, like, not one of my favorite pastiche characters. But the thing that I think is weird is that we had to end with, like, I'm so sick of people getting shot in Sherlock.
Right.
And, like, don't shoot John.
2 episodes in a row, people getting shot at the end.
Of anyone you're gonna shoot, like, don't shoot John. Please don't shoot. And then I thought the cut to red was, like, really kind of.
I thought it was very James Bond.
I thought it is James Bond. This is not James Bond. And that's the reason why I think I found it sort of, not distasteful, but just kind of cheesy. I don't know. What do you think?
The only thing I will say about this is I'm very intrigued by this idea. I think that this will all turn out on how the next episode goes. I really can't make a conclusion on this because I think the idea is interesting. We'll see how they pull it off in execution. Mm-hmm. If the execution is great, it'll be great. But there was the moment where Sherlock put on the hat and they almost walked at the door, and we were watching this and I was like, cut!
Perfect ending!
If you cut right there, this would have been like one of my favorite episodes since season 2. Mm-hmm. I would have put this up there with episodes in season 2, like the Reichenbach fall and stuff like that. But then with this ending now, I'm kind of like, so the next episode could taint the ending of this episode. So close to a near perfect episode of Sherlock, in my opinion. I don't know. I'm intrigued by this idea. We'll see how they pull it off.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is going to rest on her performance in the next episode. All right, this is the time where we are going to rate this episode of Sherlock on a scale from 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. Jason, where do you rank the dying detective?
I've looked at
the lying detective.
Okay. I've put together the clues, and I've determined that we have determined the correct episode title.
Yes.
And I'm going to give this a 4.
Wow.
I really enjoyed this. I wouldn't say this is a perfect episode because of the ending, but the ending's very intriguing. But the rest of the episode, I thought, had good emotional resonance, had a great villain. I thought the mystery was cool.
Return to form for John and Sherlock?
There were some nice moments there. There was a nice mystery. Toby Jones killed it. 4. This is one of my favorite episodes since season 2. What would you say?
I would agree. We don't do half stars on our show.
Nope.
Otherwise, I think I would give it a half rating. Since I gave the last one a 3, and I definitely like this episode a lot better, I think I will also give it a 4.
Would you have gave it a 4.5?
I would have given it a 3.5.
Oh, low.
That's like 75% of the way.
Lower than me. Why lower than me?
Because for me, I still think that every episode in season 1 and 2 is better.
Okay.
So if I'm trying to rank it in accordance with how I would have ranked those episodes, I just would have liked a little half star, but I'm comfortable giving it 4. This was a great episode. I really enjoyed it. And this episode was brought to you by Majorspoilers.com.
And I deduce that you should also click subscribe and then go down in the comments and tell us which of our theories you think is right and whether you enjoy the video. And as well, click on one of the things on the screen you see around here and open up all kinds of possibilities.
Oh, a gun!
Oh, who shot her? We'll find out next week, won't we? Time to deduce. Pants.